Hello everyone, today I'll be talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And these are basically the backbone of web development, and we'll be learning how to individually use each one to enhance what your website looks like. I'm Leon Yuan. I'm one of the organizers. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Discord channel, direct message me. If you're watching this when it's not being streamed, feel free to just message me, message one of the mentors, and we'll try to help you out with any web development issues that you may have along the way. And we'll just be starting to learn some web development. So some prerequisites would be our IDE. My choice of IDE and the one that I'll be using extensions for will be Visual Studio Code. If you don't already have it, you can download it at the link given. And it'll also be in this Hacker Survival Guide, as well as the Web Languages channel. Resources, there's a tiny URL here which will link you to a Google Doc of all the different resources that you can use. There's a lot of different links in there. Pick and choose the ones that you need. And without further ado, we're going to be talking about some of the extensions we want to add to our IDE, which is VS Code. So the first one is Live Server. So what this allows us to do is, while we're editing our HTML code, we'll be able to have things changed simultaneously on our browser. So that's what makes it powerful, in that we can see how things are being changed when we're making our small changes within our code. The next one is Bracket Pair Colorizer. This basically just colors the different braces, parentheses, and brackets. It's not super necessary for HTML, but it's really nice for CSS, really nice for JavaScript. So I would say to get the Bracket Pair Colorizer, just because it makes the environment look a lot nicer. Auto rename tag. So basically this allows us to change our tags, and one of the most annoying things can be changing both the starting tag and the ending tag. Path Intellisense. So this basically allows us to know what files are in. Basically, you can link files a lot more easily, just because your IDE will know what files are there. CSS Peek. So CSS Peek allows you to see all your different stylings for maybe that class, and it'll basically allow you to understand how the CSS is affecting your current element. Color info. This allows us to know what the color looks like without having to Google it, which helps save you time. And then Prettier. This basically makes your code a lot nicer. It'll basically make it look a lot cleaner. And the HTML snippets. So rather than having to type both sides of the tag, you'll only be typing the tag name itself, and it'll basically handle everything. So it'll be a very useful tool, because you don't have to worry about typing both sides of the tag. Okay. And then an optional one. So this one is called GitLens, and basically allows you to use a lot more of the Git features within your terminal. Within your IDE space. So you can basically see who's worked on what. This one's not very necessary for web development, but it does make things look nicer if you really need it. So before we get into the basics of web development, I kind of wanted to show how you would be able to get these extensions. So when we go into Visual Studio Code, you would be going to the Extensions tab on the left. And once you go to the Extensions tab, you would just type the name. So if I'm looking for color info, then I would be looking for it. Because I've already installed it, I don't need to reinstall it. But just to show you what it would be like is I would uninstall. We'll just reload it. I can look for color info again and then reinstall it. And then now it'll be added to my environment. So now to continue back on with the basics of web development. So web development is trying to understand what you want to build first. So how you want to do this is you want to create your design of what you want and where you want it. Think of your websites as rectangles and maybe more rectangles within rectangles. This might sound confusing at first, but this is kind of how websites are designed most of the days, most of the time. Basically, each element will end up becoming one of the rectangles, and you basically add like colors to it to make it look nice, and this is all done through CSS, your styling. So if we want to dissect a page, we want to look at how can we make things rectangles. And basically you want to use this in the way that you want to build up something. It can be easier to break down what's a rectangle and what isn't compared to actually drawing it out. But we'll start with dissecting the Mozilla homepage. So the Mozilla homepage has a lot of rectangles which can be seen. Maybe ones that you didn't really think of, but everything on this page is pretty much a rectangle. So when we make everything a rectangle, we'll be seeing how is this website designed. So you can see how there's logos that can be a rectangle. And for the most part, everything within this page is set up as a rectangle, and there's certain properties that allow you to make it more circular, like the search bar at the top. These won't be covered within this workshop, but these properties do exist if you are looking for something like that. In order to start building up your website, you want to create mock-ups of your websites with small rectangles, maybe what goes inside them, and in each rectangle you want to dissect how many more rectangles you want to make, and each rectangle will now be considered an element in HTML. So now that we have something to start with, we'll be using it for HTML. So now we can move on to what we want to use HTML for. So now that we understand how to build a website by making smaller rectangles, we can use HTML for that purpose. So now that we have HTML snippets, we can just do doc really quick. and it'll give us all of the things that we need to start our website. Okay, so, and then the div tag. The div tag is basically the general purpose tag. Pretty much everyone uses this tag, and it can just be used anywhere. And there's some styling properties that are preset. However, these can be changed with a simple change through styling. And usually when you're using the div tag, there's a lot of styling that happens behind the scenes, and it's not just the original HTML div tag, but in this case we'll just be using it to really understand what's happening within the document. So when you're using HTML, how it works is there's a beginning tag and an end tag. So the end tag is preceded by slash, and the beginning tag does not have it. So when if I were to type the div tag by hand, then I would be having to use so this would be the opener tag and then the closing tag. And that's how you would introduce a new div tag into your program. The A tag allows you to link other pages. So these pages could be external, they could be your local HTML documents. It doesn't really matter as long as you can give it an address to go to. So if I go to if I go to like google.com through a link, then that's considered an A tag. Let me show you what this means. So we can have an A tag, and we can go to google.com. Okay, and let's just say Google. So this Google will just mean that the word that will send you to the link will be called Google. And now this is where we want to use live server. So live server, you go to the bottom and you click run live server, and it'll start a web page for me. Let me move this to here, and so it'll take me to Google. Okay. 1 second. Okay. Okay, so that's how A tags work. Basically, they'll link you to other pages. So if I want my A tag to link to a different HTML document, I would, instead of using the HTTPS, I would just use the relative path to the HTML program. If you don't know that, just use the / for whatever directory your index.html is in, and however many files deep it is, so all the different folders, and then the .html. The button tag. So the button tag basically allows you to create a button, and to make something happen, we'll be using the onClick property, and this will be further discussed during the JavaScript section. I'll add this on during the demo phase of the HTML. And then the link tag allows you to add CSS into your HTML. So something like link rel style sheet href your CSS. The good thing about HTML snippets is that you don't have to worry about this. So if I am adding the CSS, I can just do link and it'll come up with that. And then I just need to give the path to the style sheet. Okay. And then there's the script tag. The script tag allows you to add your JavaScript. More than likely, you want to put the defer. This allows your HTML to happen first, and basically put your JavaScript to happen at the end. The reason you want this is because you want your HTML to load first because your browser understands HTML, but for JavaScript it basically runs it as it comes in. So your JavaScript won't be understood until your browser fully compiles it or runs it, but HTML is understood on like a static basis. So let's just finish off our HTML demo. So let's add a button in. Okay, and maybe I want to make my button called add clicks. I don't really want this to link to Google anymore, and you can see how my button appears. And I also want to show how many clicks I've done. So right now, this will require JavaScript in the future, but right now let's just focus on creating the starting state, which would be 0. So we don't have any clicks. So let's talk about CSS. So CSS makes everything look nice. CSS is basically how you want to style everything in your HTML and make it look in a certain way that you want to make it look like. So I won't cover all of the properties. However, there's a couple I do want to cover, and these are usually the most commonly used ones. Position, display, margin and padding, color, and background color. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and step right in. So CSS Position, there's 4 different types. There's the static, which is basically your default, relative, which is based off of certain params of moving it around, fixed, where it's allowed to be put anywhere on the page and basically kept there, and absolute. This is basically fixed within a parent element. So these might be kind of confusing in trying to understand what each one means. So I will be showcasing what it means to be absolute, fixed, relative, and basically your default. I will be doing this afterwards. We'll be using some coloring to make it a lot easier to understand. Display. So display, basically you want to understand what the difference between inline and block are, and block is basically just on top of each other. Inline is basically things get added next to each other. Some more advanced topics are some of the new display methods, which are through Flexbox and Grid. Flexbox really exemplifies the use of boxes. So if you really want to understand Flexbox, you really have to understand how to draw out everything with boxes. Grid is something newer in that you can have certain things in certain areas of a grid, and that's how you determine how something is placed. I won't be covering flexbox and grid because they're a lot more complicated. However, I do have some guides within the reference sheet that you can look over. So margin and padding. So margin and padding are basically the things surrounding your content. Padding is within the border. So if you're ever thinking of having the background for a certain size, you might also want to consider padding as part of it. Margin basically means outside of everything that belongs within this element. So if I have a margin of 5 to the right, and the background of my content is black, the background of the margin would probably be white, or whatever the appearance is. So margin, 10px. So there's 3 different ways of declaration, really. There's the one one argument declaration, 2 argument declaration, and the 4 argument declaration. So the 1 argument declaration basically handles the border on all sides. So this is the same for padding and margin. The 2 argument means top and bottom, and then left and right. So the 5px affects the top and bottom, and the 10px affects the left and the right. And then the 4 argument one is the top, right, bottom, left. This might take some time to remember, so just look at some more guides while you do this, and hopefully repetition helps you remember these orderings. CSS color. So color sets the font color, and then background color sets the background color. So in this case, we can see the color is the pound FF, which is the hex value for white, and the background color is black. So CSS has some preset colors, but not everything preset, so you can use hex values. You could also use RGB values. I'm not going to go over that because it can be a lot more complicated. But CSS has a lot more options. And then now we move on to selectors, and this is how CSS will know which HTML element to affect. There's the ID selector, which is the pound ID, and you would basically declare this within the HTML tag as well. I'll be demoing this. The class selector, which will be showing the changes within class. And then there's also the tag, which is not really recommended, but in some cases you would need it. Variables. CSS variables allows you to keep track of certain things. If you have thematic elements, I would say it's a good place to put it here. So in your declaration, you want to put it in the root usually, because that's where your theme really applies to everything. The root is basically the starting, I would say it's the starting element, and everything is within the root. And then you want to do var to find that color. So let's go ahead and start doing our demo. So for the demo, I'm gonna slowly incline this to be more of a more closer to like a click counter almost. So let's start with some styling, styles.css, and I will add in the link to the styles. So okay. Okay, so now that we have imported our style sheet, that's good. So our button, what if we want to make our button bigger? So let's do that first. So I want this to have a class of, actually we'll just make it have the ID of click button. And when we go to the style sheet, we can just say click button has the I believe has the background color of we'll be using, let's just use black here, and the color of white. Okay. And now you can see that it's changed the background color and the font color to black and then to white respectively. And then let's add some more background to the div over here. We'll let's make this one a class. So class of number. So you might be wondering what's the difference between a class and an ID. So an ID is usually a one of, but a class can be reused. So more than one element can end up using that number, or that can end up using that styling. So if I use the number class, we can set the margin to be 10px, so 10 on top, and also 20px. So this allows it to be 10 on top, 10 on bottom, 10 on left, 20 on left, and 20 on right. So let's see this. So we've moved that, and that helps us show that just helps keep track of the different class. If I want to add padding and also some, let me add some padding up here as well. Padding. And we can see how the div and the button have changed. Say I want to make this the position fixed. It will force the element to be within a certain size. So basically it'll be cramped within the following element. And because this div basically just auto sizes because of it, it'll just be cramped based on that. Let's try fixed with the bottom of 0. So that just means that it will be put to the bottom. And body always comes with its own stylings, so this is usually one of the things that you do change. You want to set the margin of the body to 0. And so now you can see that it's much closer to the border. So the reason this looks like that is because there's a margin. So if I take out the margin, then it'll be up against the corner as well. And then there's absolute. Which is not the best to demonstrate in here, mainly because of just not having a lot of elements, but the main ones you should be using are pretty much fixed and the regular static. The rest you can be changing. And then there's display inline, which, one second, and then we want to make this one. So inline means they're next to each other, and block means that they're on top of each other. And so in this case, you can see that the green green element is a block because it's on top of the other element. Okay, and so now we're going to continue on to adding JavaScript in. So JavaScript will be our most important asset in adding in the state for keeping track of the clicks. So the original purpose of JavaScript is for the document manipulation. So it helps keep track of information, and it's basically destroyed on refresh. And so I want to show how you can change the number of clicks you're making just by keeping track of it with JavaScript. So we'll end up having to create our own JavaScript file that we'll have to script tag and index.js, and we can defer it. Okay, so that's what we'll be focusing on. So it says that we can use document.getElement by their ID. So what we used earlier for the CSS selectors, the ID of click button allows us to easily find the button, and then the class of the number allows us to find the number. Okay. There's other ways to do document.getElementBy. So if we go into the JavaScript file,
we can see that there's document.get element by class name, by name, by tag name. But the reason you want to use ID is because there's only one of that. So that's what we'll be using in this example. Variables, we have the const and let variables. Const variables means they will not change. Let variables means they can change. So in this case, my name's not going to change, but the clicks will be continuously added on. JavaScript Objects. So JavaScript Objects can help you sort out your information. So your const, and just a simple declaration is const obj equals to the object, which includes the name, which is Leon, and the clicks, which is 1. So the two braces help denote that it's an object. And then there's JavaScript Arrays. Arrays are useful to keep track of a list of information. So objects can also have arrays, and arrays can also have objects. So if we look at the example below, we can see that there's an array of numbers, but there's also an object with an array of objects, which is completely valid in JavaScript. And so now that we know this information, we can try working on getting the clicks in. We'll be using the onClick feature of buttons. So onClick features allows you to use a JavaScript function to handle everything. So first I want to keep track of my clicks. So after I keep track of my clicks, I can use a function to keep track of what my JavaScript, what my button should be calling. So if I do function add click, I can use something in here. So clicks plus equals 1. So this basically adds one more click, and I want to find my I will do an ID here called click number. So you can have an ID without having any styles. That's perfectly fine. So we'll be using click number, and we'll be setting the inner HTML to the number of clicks. Okay. So right now we have the function, but what we don't have is the function being called. So we just need to add an onClick, and we find out the name of the function, which is add click. Add click. Okay, so now that we have everything working together, we can be adding clicks. And so that helps keep track of clicks. And so this is pretty much the basis of the JavaScript. If we want to add something more to it, say that we have multiple buttons. So we have multiple buttons. Add clicks to. And then I want to move this outside. And we want another div with the same class.
is also 0. So now you can see that there's 2 buttons and there's also 2 divs, each keeping track of their own. And so what we can do here is we can have the first black button control the first one and the white button control the second one. So what we can use instead is an array. So we have an array of 2 elements and we base it off of which function's being called. So if I do add click 2, then I will be adding clicks at 1 plus equals 1, and we would be by class name, and we'll be using number, and we can be I'll be using some slightly more complicated functions, but basically it allows me to go through a and it allows me to go through the whole loop and use it to my advantage. So we want to set and what we'll be doing is be setting the index and then .inner HTML to be clicks, to be the value. So what this will be doing is be checking both the first one and the second one. So it'll be doing a for loop which will go through all of the elements of clicks, and then because there's two elements with the class name number, we'll be taking both of them and we'll find the index of where each element is at, and set the inner HTML to the click value. So if I change this to clicks, it might be more click. And in this one, we want to keep track of clicks 0. And then this will be changed to whatever this is. And we have I have not added the on-click button for this one, so that's why it didn't work. Two. So now each button controls the other one. They control their own elements. Okay. So that's going to be all I'm covering for today's workshop. However, there are some other extras I do want to talk about, but won't really get into. So the first one is Bootstrap. Bootstrap basically allows you to start with a nice CSS. So you don't really have to worry about your styling as much, but if you do want something specific, you still need to add your own CSS on top of it, but Bootstrap's a great start to get a good head start into your CSS. jQuery, this allows you to do your API calls, and it has a lot faster manipulation. So rather than using the document.blank, they have their own version of doing it, which is usually using a $sign. These are the two additions I would say don't have as much of a steep curve compared to some of the other things. But if you're still interested, here's what I was talking about. So for advanced practices, for API calls, I would highly recommend jQuery for if you're working with vanilla JavaScript, or if you're working with jQuery itself, or if you're starting with vanilla JavaScript. If not, there's some other libraries that you could use, like Fetch or Axios. Another thing that would be nice is to understand immutability. And then you might want to learn how to transition to a JavaScript framework, be it React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, Ember, or some other ones. And then the usage of TypeScript, which really helps bind things, but not everything has TypeScript support. And just understanding packages in general. So that pretty much covers my workshop for today. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. I'll be in the channel and answering any questions that you may have. Keep in mind that I didn't cover every single CSS property, nor did I cover every single HTML element. I only kind of glossed over the ones that I was using in the demo, as well as the ones that are honestly the most commonly used. But if you have more questions regarding like what type of property I should use here, feel free to reach out, because getting started is always the most difficult thing. And like I just mentioned, questions will be answered through the chat or Discord. Just let me know, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right, thank you, and have fun hacking.